Most of us indie podcasters struggle with the marketing side of our podcast. Where do we market? Who do we market to? Well, let's ask the marketing expert.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here. I am Chris, and yeah, this is Podtastic Audio, the show which I have designed specifically to help you create and craft a better, amazing show for your audience without having to spend thousands, if yet not millions of dollars to make it happen. Now, you can podcast about whatever you want. So pretty much the sky's the limit. You know, you can podcast about your favorite dog. You can podcast about your favorite car. You can podcast about your favorite movie or style of movies that you like to watch, TV shows, whatever. Have fun. Enjoy your podcast adventure. You know, recently I was talking with somebody about podcasting. They told me that they just started listening to Podtastic Audio, and they were telling me they were listening all the way back in the very beginning of the podcast. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, those episodes way back then, first off, they were recorded on different gear with different equipment, with different sound processing on a totally different computer in an entirely different house. So it may sound a little different than they do today. And that's the thing about any podcast really, is that you do evolve as you go along with your podcast. Episode 1 or 2, or even episode 5 or 7, they're not going to sound the same as episode 200. It's going to sound way different because you evolve as you do this. It's like with anything you do. You usually get better at your job versus day 1 versus, year 10 of doing the same thing. Typically, you're a little better at it. But he was telling me that he was considering himself starting a podcast, but I think all the gear and all the tech and all the different things really start to really overwhelm you if you're not really focused on what you're going to talk about, who your podcast is going to be for, and why you're going to physically be doing it. The technology part can pretty much figure itself out. It does not take a lot of gear and equipment and money to get a podcast off the ground. You really can do it with a simple USB microphone. And if you are first starting out into your podcasting journey, you do not need to spend thousands of dollars on stuff. A simple $70 Samsung Q2U microphone will do the trick. It's amazing. You can plug it into your computer, any computer with a USB port. And if you decide to get an audio interface or a console mixer, something like that, guess what? That microphone can plug directly into that too. It can do both. So if you are a brand new podcaster and you just launched with just a few episodes, you got 1, 2, 5 episodes recorded, ready to go. They're out there in the wild for people to listen to, but you want to get people to listen to your stuff. How do you do that? Well, today I'm inviting my good friend Danielle Clark from No More Late Fees podcast. Her podcast is doing amazing. She does it with her friend Jackie. They both worked at Blockbuster Video, and they review movies from the years 1990s to early 2000s. But not only is she an amazing podcaster, her regular full-time job is in marketing. So using her skills in her marketing job, she was able to put those into practice with her podcast. So today, she is going to give you some amazing tips on how to best market your podcast, no matter what kind of podcast you have, no matter where you're starting out in your podcast journey from day 1. She is going to tell you exactly what you need to do to best position your podcast to be successful. So please enjoy my conversation with Danielle Clark.
Jackie, my co-host, and I were best friends, and we met in high school, which is like the 95 part. And then we also worked at Blockbuster right around high school towards college. So we figured those 2 decades really summed up our friendship and our relationship with Blockbuster. So that's why we picked those 2 decades.
And your show is absolutely crushing it out there. I was looking at it and you have such a huge following. You are doing wonders. And I would think because now, don't you do something with marketing? You are a marketing expert, so to speak.
I do marketing for a living. I do one-on-one coaching with people who I've been in the industry for over 10 years. So I was lucky enough to have that experience to be able to put it back into the podcast.
That's great. That's wonderful stuff. So starting with the podcast itself, if somebody were to start a podcast today, let's just say an audio only podcast, but I do know there's things on YouTube and Instagram and things like that. But let's just say a regular person started their podcast. It's an audio podcast. They got the idea. They recorded their first episode. What would be the first thing you would suggest them doing to get their podcast out to the masses?
I would get out a pen and paper, and the first thing you need to do is ask yourself, what makes my podcast unique or special, I guess you could say. And that's not to say I think there's room for a million movie podcasts, a million different true crime podcasts. But I think if you don't know what would make your podcast the reason why somebody would want to listen to it every week, you're going to lose yourself when you start marketing. So I think that's the most important, is to ask yourself, what is it about my podcast? And it could be it doesn't have to be just one thing. It could be a list of things. Once you figure that out, that helps you figure out what are the kinds of content you should be sharing. For example, for my podcast, the thing that I feel makes ours special is me and my co-host, that we're best friends and that we used to work at Blockbuster, the Blockbuster element, the nostalgia of it all. But it's all those things kind of put together. So I know I'm going to make sure that I have content that speaks to that nostalgia. I'm going to have content that speaks to our friendship, like showing our old high school pictures. We just did a video on that the other day, because we know that we're building a community. People care about that. So mixing that in as well. And then, of course, the movies that we're featuring and clips from our episodes. I think one of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started our Instagram and TikTok accounts was that I was focusing so much on the nostalgia, the special sauce, the special thing that I already identified about our podcast, which was my co-host and I and our relationship, and that relationship with Blockbuster was slowly fading away, to the point where I felt like our audience didn't even know we had a podcast.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I had to take a step back and recalibrate. And again, that's why I said it's so important to write that, uniqueness. What makes you unique? Why would people listen to your podcast? You want to come back to that, because that's going to really feed your content.
Yeah, I kind of think that a lot of people, when they start a podcast, myself included, is that you get the thing going, you start it out, and then you kind of wonder, why would someone listen to my show of all the shows out there? What makes my show so unique? And I think a lot of people they'll kind of fall into it's me and my buddy Joe. We're funny or whatever, but are you really funny? I know you think you're funny, but are you really that funny? And then, they have no real core content to kind of leverage, or maybe they do. Maybe it's a movie thing, for example, and things like that. But then what is the draw to the show? Is it you guys being the funny, or is it the movie itself being the draw to the show? I kind of wondered, how do you balance that thing?
Right. Well, the movie is going to be the thing that stops. It's the scroll stopping, right? Like when you're scrolling, if you see the movie that you like, then you're going to stop for a second. And then you have a short period of time, once they stop scrolling, to catch their attention with something else. It's not just going to be the movie. So I think it's a combination. And so the second step, after figuring out what makes you unique, is you need to write down, who is my target audience?
Right. Your actual listener. Who's the show for?
Right. Because I think so many podcasters are trying to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, that you can't just throw a net and try to get everybody you could possibly get. You want to start with people who are going to be loyal, rabid fans, because they're going to be the ones that are going to help you with the heavy lifting.
What do you mean? What do you mean by heavy lifting? Like, what are they going to do?
Because it's much easier to have 100 fans that really love your show than to have 10,000 followers and nobody's really paying attention.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. You look at some of those podcasts and stuff like that, or just Instagram pages. Look at their engagement. Are they getting comments? They might get likes, but is there any kind of rapport or community building there?
Yeah, I always think that's very important to have the feedback, whether it's on social media or emails or whatever it is in general. That really kind of tells whether or not people are physically listening to the thing and they're physically at least paying attention to the thing that you're creating out there. So the second thing is make sure you know who you're talking to and get basically a dedicated core of people to at least follow you and at least pay attention to what you're saying.
Right. And that goes to, once you identify, like for us, we're like, okay, we know that we are targeting elder millennials like ourselves and younger millennials. Also, we might pull in a little bit of Gen Z, but you're not going to be targeting your third tier group.
Okay.
Because they're not your core. If you get them, great, but you want to make sure you're focusing on your core audience. And so that is looking like, people who are me and Jackie's ages, who experience Blockbuster and these movies in real time. Now, you always want to come back to this. You can't just pick a target audience and just go about your business for like 6 years. You always have to come back, because the great thing about social media is you have all these analytics. So you can start to see what those stats look like. You could start to see, I've got 50% men and 50% women, or I have 70% men. I never thought that would happen. Like, you're able to see who your audience is starting to become on social, and you might need to pivot because that is not who your target audience is. Or you have to look at, what content am I doing? And sometimes your target audience you might have to shift what you're doing, because you're like, okay, maybe my target audience was not that elder millennial group. Maybe this is where I need to pivot a little bit, because the stats are now telling me who I'm attracting. So you have to be able to pay attention to that as well, to make sure that you're kind of sticking to where you need to go for your path.
And sometimes your podcast, at least this one here, Podcastic Audio, has evolved from day one till now. I've changed it quite a bit. And I kind of steered away from, I know in the early days when I had you on and probably had some other shows on, is that I would just bring anybody on with the podcast, just talk about their podcast, come on. I've kind of steered away from that. I've kind of pushed more towards if this is going to deliver value to the audience of podcasters, that's the core people I want on the show. I don't want a bunch of randoms just coming in, talking about their day and their stuff, which there are a lot of podcasts that do that. They'll have their buddies on or whatever, and they'll talk about the randomness of it all. The good old days of 2020 when everybody was kind of bored, not doing nothing. So they would just have their buddies on and call it a podcast. I want to steer clear of all that stuff. I'm only here to deliver value directly to the listener about podcasting. And if any guest that comes on does not deliver that, I'm not having them on.
Right. Yeah. And that's perfect. I think that speaks to one of the hardest things that we've had to adjust to. What we never really thought was going to happen is we get a lot of requests for people to be on the show, almost to the fact that some people approach us as if they deserve to be on the show, or it's a given. Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. And it's really hard to say no. One of our strategies was finding people who were influencers, who were talking about things that were in our niche. And we learned a few hard lessons there, because people who have YouTube channels or TikToks, some people are not good on the cuff. They're not good to be able to kind of riff like Jackie and I do on the show. So we see them have these charismatic personalities, and then they come on the show and it's like we had our friends and family saying, "Oh my god, you didn't let that person talk." We're like, "Trust us, the stuff we edited out, like we could not get them to talk." So one of the suggestions that I would give from our learned experience there is try to do a live or a spaces or a phone call to kind of see if you vibe with that person, if they get what you're talking about. And also, as a guest, if you are going on someone's show, do the courtesy to at least listen to that person's show.
Oh, I can't believe how many times when Christina and I would have a guest come on and we'd ask them, "Have you listened to our show?" And it was probably 9 out of 10 times the answer was no. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. All right. So here's how we do our show. It's not scripted. It's a conversation. We have bullet points. We have ideas to talk about, but and it throws them off sometimes, and they're not ready for it. And some people who do listen, they do benefit because they do get the flow. Do get the idea of the show. So it does benefit them, but you'd be surprised how many people just spray and pray out there. Just get on as many shows as possible, even shows that aren't even related to the content. Like I've got people want to come on this show and it's not even related to podcasting. So,
Yeah.
and, or even people that have a podcast, they want to just come on and talk about it or something like that. But, this podcast with your podcast, the listeners podcast, it's your baby and you should really protect it and not try to just like let any stranger babysit it, I guess.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening, and we've all fallen for this because we love our shows and we're so desperate to try to get exposure. And so I think it's okay to be a little bit more cautious. And that's why I'm really drilling in that you have to write some of these things down so that you have something to look back on, but it helps you stay aligned and focus. So you got your target audience, you know what your special uniqueness is, and then it's community building, right?
Okay.
So you're going to notice pretty quickly if you get, we call them besties on our show. If you get new besties who discover the show, they direct message you, they are always the first to comment. You want to show them love. You want to build that parasocial relationship with them. Because again, they're going to be the ones that are going to share it on their stories. They're going to tell their friends about it. Also, when I get a new follower sometimes or someone shares something, I always ask, "Hey, how did you hear about us?" That's like really, really helpful. When you're starting, I think the biggest mistake or the biggest hurt that I've heard from other podcasters is that they try to, solicit their friends and family to follow and listen to their podcast, and they get really upset because they don't. Your family and friends are not your audience.
What do you mean? What do
I'm
they?
sorry to tell you. They're not. I mean, sometimes it matches up. We've been very lucky where like my mom listens and watches on YouTube. Jackie's sister and brother listen. So like we do have some family and friends. It aligns because they listen to podcasts. They like the show. But sometimes it doesn't. Like my youngest sister in the beginning, the first seasons, she was like helping us. We called her our producer. But my sister doesn't do podcasts. She doesn't. She supports in other ways. And that's the other thing. You have to figure out what other ways people in your life can support you because podcasts might not be their thing and you just got to let it go. And that's okay.
So if you're building a community from scratch as a brand new podcaster, like what would be the thing to really focus on? It would be Facebook, social media, YouTube. Well, how do you even begin to grow anything?
Well, I think, again, if you go back to your friends and family about how they can support, they can follow at least. So you're building that following numbers. You can ask something of them, give them an assignment. Like, can you share this out? Like, especially when you're first starting, you want to share as much as you can. But then going back, you have to look at how much time and how much time and effort you're going to be able to have for social. I would recommend that you make sure that you claim every single social media platform with your name. That's like a given. Because
Your show name, right?
yes. So first, when you're picking your show name, before you even start and you make an episode, Google is free, everybody. Google your name or what you think of and see what's coming up on Google, and then make sure you go to all the other platforms and see if it's taken anywhere. Do not do like if we were to do no dot more late fees on Twitter and then no more late fees podcasts on Instagram. It goes back to when I was saying that you want to make it easier for your listeners. So if you can, I know it's hard sometimes because things are taken, but trying to find a name that you could be able to use the same at for every single platform.
That's a good idea. That's good. That's really good, because when we did Chris and Christine's show, for some reason, I don't know, some of them were taken or I don't know what happened, but there are multiple different versions of it across the different platforms. And I think it's like the worst way to do it. And I'm learning now that I didn't know back then, because when I started, I knew nothing about any of this stuff.
Right.
And so I guess having your name be the thing on all the different platforms. Now, should you be on every single one you can, or should you just focus on a few?
Only focus on a few. Again, you have to look at your time. So I'm trying to reiterate that you want to be prepared for if something happens quickly, right? So there's nothing like you blow up and then you're scrambling because you didn't get your YouTube name or you didn't get your Facebook name and someone else has taken it. It's a nightmare. I've seen it happen even with some of my clients.
No way.
Yeah. So that's why you want to think ahead as if you're already going to be big one day, right? And then the other thing is to make sure that you say, okay, going back to my target audience. If my target audience, like for the podcast, is millennials, elder millennials, younger millennials, then I'm going to go to all the platforms I have available and say, where are they huddled up together, right? I know, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, they're on Twitter. Now, TikTok, I was surprised about because I just thought, when my first thoughts of TikTok was like, this is just for kids.
Yeah.
I never thought I was going to make a TikTok. And I was so surprised by the community that I was able to find there. There's a big movie community there, and TikTok was just like the fastest platform to grow really quickly. I don't think it's the same now as it was in 2021 when we started. Things have changed with the algorithm and all, but go where your target audience is, but only do the platforms that you know you're going to put the time and effort into. So
right, that makes sense. I mean, we only have so many hours in the day, and
Right.
most of us, any podcasters, myself included, is that I have a full-time job, and then I do this on the side. So I don't have the resources or manpower to be, on every platform, manning everything and doing all the things over and over again. So once you have your social media as kind of like your core 3 or whatever it is, kind of figured out, and you're posting there, what should you be posting to kind of drive interest to your show?
Well, the first thing you have to do is, once you figured out your platforms, you want to make sure your bio is consistent on every platform. That who you are, you've gotten it down to 120 characters or less. Like, you're able to make sure that is there. This is how you're going to be potentially found, right? Instagram, I've seen so many people not put anything. I've seen people put things that have nothing to do with their show. Again, you want to go back to your targeted audience. You want to go back to what makes you unique and find out, what are those keywords essentially? What are those words that, if I was going to search for your podcast, the words I would search with? That should be in your bio.
Okay, for all the different platforms. Now, should the same thing be in your bio for your podcast itself? Because you set up a podcast, whether it's on Buzzsprout or wherever, you type in the bio of the podcast. Should that match the same thing on social media?
As much as possible. You have a little bit more leeway there to have a little bit more characters and words. So yes, you want to make sure from an SEO standpoint. search engine optimization standpoint, that you're making sure you're telling the algorithms that exist who you are, so that they will be like, because people are like, the algorithm hates me. It doesn't. You have not provided it with the information needed to serve it up to someone who's looking.
So rich with keywords that will drive people to your show. Now, the show artwork, should it be exactly the same thumbnail for all of your social medias?
So, one thing before we go there, ChatGPT, AI, I don't think you should use it for like big things, but something like your bio, telling the AI what exactly your podcast is, it can help you spit out some bios to make that part easier if it's hard for you. So that's just a suggestion.
Oh yeah,
Secondly,
I love ChatGPT, by the way.
secondly, for your logo, let's start with the logo before we start with the art. You need 3 different types of logos. You need your main logo, you need a logo that can be in black and white, and your logo might be stacked, or it might just be like the full name across. You probably need a variation, because when you're putting your logo in for your avatar on different platforms, it's not, if it doesn't show up right, it already, you're giving like a wonky look. And I hate to say it, people don't even realize that they're judging a book before, by its cover situation.
Oh yeah.
You want to look as clean and polished as possible. That's your first impression. So if you're going to spend any money on anything, I would say to try to do it with the artwork. If you don't have the money to get someone to do it on like Fiverr or Upwork, then I would highly recommend paying for the Pro of Canva. It
Yeah.
has a majority of the work that I've posted has come from being able to utilize that. And they have all the sizes for every different platform, which is very helpful, so that you can make sure that that's all good.
Yeah, especially like with YouTube thumbnail. Like I didn't know idea the YouTube thumbnail had to be a certain dimensions and certain pixel sizes and stuff. I think I would just make something and threw it in there and said it's too big. I'm like, what? And then Canva, I would go into Canva, they've got a whole YouTube thumbnail section where you can plug and play your own stuff into their templates, and it makes it so easy. I love Canva for that kind of stuff. It makes it very easy to do that. So once you have your artwork all kind of figured out, and I do know, like you said, they do look at your stuff before they are going to press play or anything. It's not just, I mean, people say they shouldn't read a book by its cover, but everybody really does.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are visual learners, and then these platforms are made especially for visual, things to be appealing for your visual senses. When you're making your cover, now it's really important to look at Apple, especially because Apple rules the roost essentially when it comes to what potentially that they might pull your podcast to put it on the discovery section or whatever. And they have very, very stringent, specific rules about what your cover should look like how the sizes of it. They give you specs. Like if you really take the time and go read what they have on their website about the specification, if you're starting off, it's really good to try to get it as close to what they're recommending.
Yeah, that's what at first we didn't do any of that stuff. Like I said, when we first started the Chris and Christine show, we knew nothing about nothing. So we just threw it all together on our phones, like, hey, on the couch, this looks good. Okay, great. And I kind of did the same thing on Podtastic Audio at first, my old logo, which now looking back at it, I'm like, gosh, this color scheme was so off. Like, what was I thinking? I was just playing around on my phone with it. Like, this looks good. And the new one's much better. It's brighter. You actually can read the lettering, which is even better. And I think that does help. But what I did hear when it comes to logos, I don't know if this is true or not, but you being in marketing, let me ask you this, is that your podcast artwork works better if there's a face in the image. Is that true?
It can. Yeah. I mean, we don't have one, but what was interesting about our logo is that we, you know, it looks familiar enough because it brings up the nostalgia of Blockbuster, because
Correct.
Blockbuster was the ticket. So if you're not going to put your face in it, like we just updated our artwork to have Jackie and I on it, and we hadn't done that for a while.
Right,
So
right. Yeah.
I do think it can help, but I don't think it's the biggest deal. I think you just want to make sure that the font is readable. A lot of people try to do something cutesy with like the script and stuff.
Yeah.
You have to imagine that you're in a car and you're driving past. Say your logo was like on a storefront or something, and you're driving by, and you want to make sure that the person driving by pretty quickly can read what your sign says, right? Same thing for your logo and for your podcast. You want to make sure that there's no questions. Was that an I? That was that an L? I don't know what that is. And
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah, definitely. So, okay. So, marketing here. So, marketing a podcast, I know it's kind of tricky because typically, an audio podcast is an audio format, it's audio
Mhm,
media, but marketing something that's audio on a social media, which is typically a visual platform, you
mhm.
got to figure some kind of middle ground. How do you figure that out?
Well, the good thing about YouTube is that the stats tell us that audio podcasts perform pretty well on YouTube, regardless of the video podcasts that are popping up. Like the audio ones are still outperforming. So there's still spaces for it. I think Twitter is a great community for indie podcasts. And the thing about indie podcasters is that they actually listen to podcasts. So becoming a part of that community and sharing your podcast there, that's an opportunity for new listeners. I, I would say a good amount of even our most rabid fans are other podcasters. So you just never know there. Now, when it comes to TikTok and Instagram, there's so many creative ways that you can take your audio clips and turn them into video, right? You can get b-roll on Canva. If you're doing a movie podcast, you can put clips of your movie with your audio with it. Pictures, as long as things are moving, you could do memes. There's a lot of creative things that you can do that doesn't have you just stuck with the audio. But I would say if you're doing stuff on Instagram, the carousel is great, right? Like reels, everyone's talking about reels and video, but Instagram does prioritize its carousel posts. So do that as like you're telling a story. You have your cover where you're saying exactly what's happening, right? Or you're introducing the piece of content. If it's the audio, you could start with like a cover photo saying, asking a question even, right? To get them to slide to the next one. And that piece of content can be the audio piece of the clip. And then the last part could be, hey, for more, come and check out our episode, whatever. So you're telling a story using carousels in a way that is going to get people to stop for a little bit, and they're going through the whole thing.
So, for those who don't know what a carousel post is on Instagram, it's basically when you select multiple photos in your photo album to be put on as the photo. So when they do come up to that in their post in their feed, they scroll to the right and it goes to the next photo you put in there, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. How many can you put in there? Is it unlimited? Is there a cap on that?
10. You can do 10.
Okay. Now, would you suggest doing all 10, or should you keep it to like 4 or something?
It just depends on what you're doing. Right now, there's a trend, or there's been a trend for a little bit now, a few months, where it's a static photo and a video. And Instagram will consider video the audio piece, right? Because it's going to be an MP4.
Okay.
So having the static and then sliding on to the video part is been working well for a lot of people. So I definitely would test it out.
Very interesting. So, speaking of Instagram, what is the quickest way, do you think, other than just putting carousels and videos out there? What's the quickest way to build an audience on Instagram specifically?
Instagram is very, very hard. I think this is how you should look at it. This is the prioritization of Instagram from Instagram. Stories, direct message, reels, carousel. Those are like the top 4 things that you should be paying attention to. They're very much looking at stories. So much so that it's really, again, when you talk about your target audience, sometimes they'll tell you what they want. So Instagram has looked at the stats and realized that people love the stories, and that's what they're engaging with. And after stories, people are in direct messages, having conversations. They're sharing reels back and forth. They're having, comments there, group chats. And then it goes to reels. When you look at a reel, I want you to think of, I'm making this reel, and the reel is for me to get more attention from people outside of my community or who's following me.
I think it does push, at least the algorithm, I think it pushes the reels out to a wider, broader, net of people versus your own core people that follow you.
Mm-hmm. So when you're making a reel, you need to think about, okay, I'm catching someone's attention. I want to make sure that this reel aligns with my podcast, like what I'm offering on the podcast. If you do a fun meme and it has nothing to do with the content, you're going to get a bunch of people who come to your page and they're not going to resonate with any of the other content. But if you put something that has to do with your content, they're going to want to go to your page, and then they're just liking and watching more videos. They're staying on your page, and that's what you want.
Yeah, I think that Instagram or whatever platform it is tracks the time of use on that particular person's content. I would think it's kind of interesting how, like with stories, I would thought that reels would be higher priority than stories, or are they about equal on par with each other?
No, it's just in that order. It's stories, direct message, and then reels. So they just sent out, I think it was yesterday, an update. And this is another thing. If you're not following Instagram creators page, you should, because they're constantly posting different tips of what you should be doing on your page directly from Instagram. So they posted what changes they're going to be making to help creators, especially small creators. I think one of the biggest things that they're trying to clamp down on are a lot of the meme pages. They want original content. And so they're going to start kind of giving demerits to people who are not creating original content, essentially.
Really? The memes are the best thing. Everyone shares memes and makes memes of different things, and they'll take video from something else and twist it into something completely different, but it's funny. I love that stuff. Just last night, as I record this episode, my absolute favorite Instagram page of all time that I absolutely love, I just got a note on Twitter X saying that Instagram closed them down. They had 317,000 followers, and they just shut them down because they said a note about copyright saying, because they're a meme type of content, and just shut them down. And they were pissed, and they're trying to reach out to Instagram, and they couldn't figure out how to get hold of them or what to do. Or they said they sent a warning saying that your memes, quote unquote memes content, was violating some copyright or something like that. So it's a very tricky thing to do. And on this note is that no matter how big you are, Instagram can shut you down for, it's their world. You're living in it, so that's the thing to consider, I think.
And that's why I think it's really important. So in marketing, we have something that's called earned media and owned media. Now, social media is considered owned, which means that you have full clearance over it. But I would say the cleanest version of that is email, because if you own your email list, you'll be able to continue to talk to your audience no matter what happens to a social media platform. So if you're not building an email list, and that's on me too, we need to work on that.
Right, yeah.
You're missing out opportunities. And if any of these platforms go away, you'll lose all the people that are in your community.
Like everybody on TikTok right now, I wonder what they're doing. They're probably stressing out.
Well, TikTok, there's more legality to that. So there's supposed to be 9 months from the ruling or whatever. But I do believe that TikTok is going to go to the Supreme Court and fight this. there's too much money that they're making in the United States for them to kind of just be like, okay, peace out. So that whole situation may not happen as quickly as people are saying, but don't panic. Just make a contingency plan, try to drive more traffic back to your other social media platforms. And again, try to drive people to sign up for your newsletter so you can stay in connection. This is a great opportunity actually to do that, whether or not TikTok goes away, to grow your email list because people understand that they think that it might, go away.
Well, it's also a good point to having an actual audio podcast, not just a YouTube channel, not just the Instagram, not just a TikTok. If you have an actual RSS feed audio podcast, you own that. And if for some reason Spotify doesn't like you because you said something, okay, you got Apple. If Apple doesn't like you, you got something else. And if none of them like you, you can still plug in your RSS feed into an app and get it to play that way. It's tricky. I've never had to experience that, but it's a little more hands-on. You got to figure it out. But still, if everybody cancels you, you still have the opportunity to still create a podcast and still get it out to the listeners. Maybe a little trickier to do, but they can still get out to you versus YouTube can completely close you down. I remember I was looking up research for an episode a while back. I was just curious to see how many big YouTubers got canceled. And I'm thinking, like, it doesn't matter how big you are. If they don't like you for whatever reason or no reason at all, it seems like they can just shut you down. And going back to the Instagram page, and I feel bad because I love that I love their stuff. Their stuff was so good that I always would reshare it in my stories. Like almost everything they posted, I would reshare it because it was called San Diego Humor, and they branded with another Instagram page. How long that's gonna last, I don't know. But it was always local humor that was like, if you lived here, you thought it was funny because you get it. It's like, oh yeah, that's funny because I understand that mall or I understand that part of town or something like that. So it makes sense to us who live here. So it was hilarious, and they were really, really popular. And, I just feel bad that just kind of just disappeared like that. But it was so, mostly memes. I mean, I think it was all memes for the most part. And it was all funny stuff. But it's funny you say that about the memes. They want more original content. But who do they think they are? You know what I'm saying?
So all in all, what's really happening is that Meta has a tendency that it has in the past literally just figured out what made the competitor's platform special, stole the resources of it, and restructured it to fit into their platforms. They're really having a hard time because they can't figure out TikTok's algorithm. So if TikTok was a podcast and the question I asked of what makes you unique, what makes you special, it would be their algorithm, that they're able to send people videos that speak directly to them, matching their habits and how they've been using the platform. And Instagram, Meta can't figure that out, and it's driving them crazy.
I thought they had a pretty good idea with it because I know that, well, at least look at YouTube, for example. With YouTube, if you're watching cat videos or one cat video, what do you see in your side column? It's all cat video or cat video related stuff. So some of these other social medias have something figured out because
they're great, but it's not like TikTok's. It's so, I don't even know how to describe it. I've been on all the platforms. None of them have served me content in the way that I feel like I'm just in a silo. I do not usually see things on my TikTok feed that have no interest to me whatsoever.
Wow.
And if I'm on YouTube, I'm going to see the cat videos, but I'm also going to see something randomly about fitness because I looked at something maybe once. TikTok will know, oh, she's not on fitness anymore. We're not showing her that.
But they also know exactly to the second or millisecond how long you looked at a certain post, and they put that into the equation and figure all that stuff out. Somebody should just sell the algorithm, really.
Well, that's what makes the money. That's why they're like, no, we're not leaving. So it's really interesting. But go ahead.
No, I was gonna ask you because the reason why I had you on the show in the first place is that you were asking me about. We were in the Twitter X retweeting groups a while back, and I did an episode a couple episodes ago about that. and how we decided to shut it down and leave. And you reached out to me asking me like, hey, what's up?
Yeah. So I found that whole thing to be interesting because when I first started, our podcast, I was trying to figure out like what to do next. And I stumbled upon like groups, like people started sending follow Fridays and included us and asked us if we wanted to be in it. And we're like, okay. And it was really interesting. There was a lot of different podcasts that were from a different range. The only thing we all had in common were that we were podcasts.
Right.
And so it started dwindling pretty quickly. Like a lot of shows didn't make it. But now there's only one that I'm in now. And it's gotten so small that it's very nice. It feels very community based. And so what I would recommend if you are going to join one of these groups is to if you're going to start one of these groups and if you're going to join one of these groups is to be as clear as possible what your intentions are, like the expectations are of the group, so that will make sure that you're not having like any kind of issues. Because I think some people come in and they're just thinking about themselves. They don't look at it as a community. So
Oh yeah,
I think
definitely.
it's important to find other podcasts that you can be in community with. It doesn't make sense to just have thousands upon thousand podcasts that you're just like kind of liking every now and again or forcing the like, and you don't even listen to their podcast. They don't listen to yours. You're not in community with them. You're not like, if I need something, if you need something, if we could talk about advice, like really find podcasts you could be in community with. Because one of the things that I found that really I had a few people that I knew followed us. They had stopped following. And I was like, well, what happened? And they're like, well, I came to your podcast because I really liked 90s nostalgia. I really liked what you guys were talking about. And it's really hard to see your content because you're retweeting all these other podcasts and other information that I can't find your content. Also, I'm not interested in this other stuff. I feel like I was getting spammed. That was what once somebody said to us.
No way. It's very interesting. I think I heard that too. Not directly. I heard that third party from somebody. They said that if you do these Twitter retweeting groups and you do just retweet other people's stuff, your feed is just nonsense of other people's stuff.
Yeah, you're not. So, like, okay, every now and again, I'll have a tweet that does pretty well, And so then you get a good group of people who are interested, then they want to see what other tweets you have. And then they go to your page and they're like, I don't know what this is. And they're out. So I think there's a better way that we can support indie podcasts or each other than just blindly retweeting the content.
Okay.
One thing that I found was that like if you like a tweet, it will show up on someone's feed, because if you look at your news or time feed, whatever it is, your feed, you will see that there's a tweet. It's not from someone you follow, but at the top it'll say so and so liked this or so and so retweeted this. So liking is just as good, essentially.
Okay.
Not as wide as a retweet. I'm not going to lie about that, but it's not going to clog up your feed if that's what you want to do. And I think then saving the retweets for things that really resonate with your content and your brand, like where it would fall. Or if you just like, if you do it every now and again, it doesn't feel as spammy. It feels more organic. It feels authentic, and that is what people want to see on social media more than anything is authenticity.
Yeah, I believe that too. And going back to the retweeting everybody's stuff and people who weren't retweeting, that's why it made me mad in the first place, is that I was putting stuff in there and nobody retweeted my stuff, but yet they asked me to retweet their stuff. I always thought it was kind of like an even thing, like I do for you, you do it for me. And that's kind of how, at least the way I thought it was supposed to be when I joined these things in the first place. I think early on in the middle of 2020, when there were so many shows on there, it was like everybody was helping each other out. It was just sharing and resharing and sharing and resharing as quickly as we could, because we all had this idea that we all wanted to grow on social media as quickly as we could. And this was an easy, free way to do it. And in theory on paper, like I said, it sounds like it should work. I mean, everybody should share. We should get your audience to follow me. I should follow you. It all should work. But I think it became a mishmash. And then I said some shows weren't doing it at all. They were just posting their stuff, posting random stuff. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this?
And I don't think it actually causes anyone to see your show. So you have 50 people and they're all sharing, each of the 50 people are sharing the 50 pieces of content, and it's just going in a circle, and no one from the outside is really going to be like listening to any of that. It's not adding any value. Twitter is wonderful because you can find real-time conversations of people talking about the subject that you want. So again, if you go back to writing a list of the things of like, what do I cover on my podcast? What are the keywords that people are looking for? You can use those same keywords to put it in Twitter and find people having real-time conversations and jumping in them organically, not spammy, like check out my podcast. Because you also have to think about, what does that person really care about? Make it a real conversation. I think because we're online, people feel like you could just be spammy, but just pretend you're in real life. You would never go up to someone and jump into their conversation and say, hey, check out my podcast. You wouldn't do that.
Like, who the hell are you? Get out of here.
Right. So don't do that online, because all that's going to do is you might hit the wrong person, and next thing you know, you got a 1-star review. Like, don't do it.
Right. Yeah.
So just try to find your people. Find people who are talking about the things that you are offering as an added value. And once you build those conversations and community, then they're like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to check out that episode. And if they like it, they're going to come back. And that's when you could stand 10 toes down on your podcast. Because if you just get them through the door, your podcast is going to keep them coming back.
As long as it's good. As long as it's a good show. You got to start with that first. I think a lot of people miss that part, So I think it's probably wise to probably have some serious audit of your content, your show, your whole thing by somebody not named mom or your brother, because they're always going to say it's great. I think it's got to be somebody, maybe you have to pay for this service. I don't know, but because I started reviewing shows too for a minute, and people didn't seem to like the even though I was being very honest and very kind. And one show, oh my God, it was horrible, and I was like, I was trying to be nice about it, but in a nice way, saying, it's hot garbage. But in a nice way, but they didn't take kindly to it, of course, because who really would? It's their baby. And then I had to realize people don't want reviews. They don't want to be told it's hot garbage. They want to be told it's amazing. Even if it is hot garbage, they want to be told it's amazing.
I think that you can do review exchanges, but you have to be honest upfront. Again, setting expectations. One, if you're going to approach someone, make sure you listen to their podcast first and see if it's something that aligns with you. And then also give that other person the opportunity to say like, hey, I really liked your podcast. Will you check out mine? Do you want to do a review exchange? But I want to give you the opportunity to go listen to my podcast and check it out first if you don't feel comfortable. Like, check it out first before you say yes or no. If they disappear, leave them alone. That's their out, it's okay. And I think it's all right to say to someone, oh, I don't do review exchanges. It is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I got hit up by a guy a couple of times, and that's all they do. It's another way people do is to get their reviews on Apple. They will just do review exchanges without listening to the show at all. And they say they do, but sometimes they don't. They just want to get the review swaps.
Apple won't let you anymore.
What do you mean?
I believe you have to actually, maybe they're not listening, but you have to, on Spotify and on Apple, you have to play through before you can write a review.
No way.
It won't stick. So yeah.
Because I see
Apple
guys
change a few things.
I see guys with hundreds and hundreds of reviews, and because they're asking me for a review swap, and I'm like, you're just doing it to collect reviews. That's all you're doing. You're not. And I've heard Apple themselves say reviews do not help you get found in Apple. It's just social proof. And maybe that's what you need. You want social proof to prove people actually listen to my show. So you should too. Maybe that's why they do it. I don't know.
Mhm. The funny thing is, Apple is hilarious because they don't tell you what their algorithm is or what exactly, they don't tell you what you do actually causes you to be on their top chart list. They don't tell you how you could potentially, now you can fill out a form. There's a form that you can do for Apple to consider you as one of their recommendations. And you can fill out this form. If you're not approved, you have to wait like I think is it 6 weeks yeah, it might be 6 weeks. I'm not 100% on that. And then you can try again. So there is a way to like try to submit it if you can, especially if you're having like, that you're going to have an anniversary episode or something special. They would like for you to submit it with 2 weeks prior, so
Okay.
that at least 2 weeks prior.
Have you
So
had any success with that?
I haven't yet, but I know other people who have, and that goes back to that very sticky situation with the your cover. There's a lot of things. They make it hard. They make it hard for indie podcasts to be selected for that, to be honest. But we keep trying.
Yeah, I think if you're having fun and you're enjoying what you're doing, then keep on keeping on. It's something that I enjoy doing this. I love this whole content. I love the media of audio, and I love, listening to podcasts, love creating podcasts. I love this kind of stuff. I love it more than YouTube, and I watch YouTube not as much, but I just love the audio content probably because I'm always on the road more than I am in an office setting. So it works for me. And I know that I've heard that audio itself, the audio podcast, will
Hmm.
outperform the video version of the same content 10 to 1. I don't know if you've seen that or not,
Yeah,
but
because podcasts, people are listening to podcasts where they're doing other things. When you have video, you feel obligated that you have to sit and watch it. That means, especially if your podcast is long, ours is a little bit long, that you now have to dedicate a certain amount of time and you can't really do anything else. That's the mindset, I think. So that totally makes sense. Also, a lot of people listen to podcasts commuting. I recommend that if you're a podcast and you've had your podcast for a while and you feel like you're in a rut, do a Google form and do a survey to the people that listen to the show and ask them what they like, what they don't like, what can be improved. Make it a safe space for them to be able to give that feedback, because your whole thought process is that you want to be better. We did that a few months ago. We had an audit. We had someone else outside, a different podcast expert audit our podcast, and they gave us a lot of feedback. We, like I said, that we're just doing nostalgia content. One of the things was like, hey, we're not showing what's great about the podcast, which is the clips of the actual podcast. Some people don't even know we have a podcast. So we had to recalibrate that. And every video that we create now, I have to think about, how does this tie back to the podcast in an organic way where it's not like, look at my podcast. So I started adding a um, end credit at the end of some of our videos, so it reiterates that we're a podcast.
that's a good idea. You want to steer them to the podcast. If they don't know, they don't know. They think you're just another Instagram page or just another whatever,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So I guess the core is if you have the podcast, steer them to the podcast, but don't make it the first. Don't put it on the front door. Get them in the door first, and then tell me how to podcast.
Yeah, and use your stories. So with Instagram stories, you want to look at this as another marketing avenue, and it has to relay back to the podcast in some way. Do polls, you know, if there's something topical, like for example, the Scooby Doo movie is the Scooby Netflix is making a Scooby Doo TV show, right? That would be a great pop quiz or not a quiz, a poll that I could do with my audience, because I know I'm talking to them about nostalgia. I could say, like, what do you guys think? Should Netflix do this live action? No, I want a Scooby Doo 3. I can't wait for you guys to do it on the podcast. Throw some things in there that's kind of making it fun, but like you have a poll, right? Polls do really well. Instagram looks at you using their different, the different things that they have available, they look at that. They want you to use those things. They want you to ask questions. They want you to use polls. They want you to do things within the platform, and they reward you for it. You want to look at your stories and see how many views you're getting. They will send your stories out to people that they haven't sent a reel out in a while.
Really?
And yes. And if someone consistently comes back to your stories once or twice or 3 times, then when they log into Instagram, you are at the top of their stories now. You're going to be coming up first instead of all the way in the back. And that's what you want.
Nice.
So you want your stories to be rich, fun, and engaging. You want to mix in content that you're sharing. Don't just share all your reels and then be out. You want to engage your audience. That's where they are. They are not in reels. They are not in the post. They are in your stories. They are in your direct messages. And you want to start those conversations. Ask a question, post something so that I get so many people DMing us asking something because of the stories. And now we're having conversation, and Instagram sees that.
That's incredible. I think having direct community feedback, and it's more important than likes or views. I would think having comments, like how many comments did it get? Like I posted something on Threads the other day, and I haven't checked it lately, but it blew up. I was trying to keep up with all the comments because it literally blew up, and it had nothing to do with the podcast or anything like that. It was just something I saw, and I just posted a picture of it, and it just went crazy. I think in one day it had like over 100 comments in one day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm trying to keep up with it all, and I'm trying. Some are negative, some are positive, but it was like here I am trying to respond to everything, and I'm trying to keep up with like, oh my gosh, it blew me away. But I think things like that can happen, with certain posts, and I think posts that you create that can drive community feedback is much better than just getting eyeballs, view count, I guess.
Yeah, and if you have a reel and someone commented something fun or you're getting some cool comments, share the reel with that comment. You can do that now so that there's context to the reel with someone commenting. And you can write, do you agree with Brittany XLL, whatever.
Interesting.
So yeah, there's just stories, man. That's where it's at. Y'all got to start playing with the stories. Don't take it for granted. Make sure that it's aligning with what your brand is. Don't just share whatever because it's fun. Like, you want to make sure that it's keeping them in the mindset of what your brand is.
That's right, Danielle. I do appreciate everything you say. You are the marketing expert. I want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today. Where can everybody find out all about you and all your wonderful stuff?
You can check out our podcast at No More Late Fees on every platform. And we are on Apple, Spotify. If you want to listen to the podcast, we're very unhinged, talking about movies from the late 90s and 2000s. And and if you have marketing questions or whatever, you can direct message us on Instagram, and then I can provide other information if needed.
Wow, that was amazing. I hope you learned some amazing tips and tricks on how to better market your podcast. Thank you, Danielle. You are the best. And if you want to get in touch with her, all of her links to all of her stuff is down below in the show notes of this very episode. Thank you so much for being here. I truly do appreciate you giving me your time today. And if you got any value from this episode, and I know I did, can you do us a small favor and share this podcast episode out to your audience? And if you do, tag either one of us in the post, and we would love to reshare and post it and shout you out when you do. And until next time, happy podcasting.